Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. In today's lesson, we'll add live updates to our React table with data polling. We'll also do some final code reviewing and refactoring as we work towards deployment. I'll provide a link to all resources in the description. And I'll also provide a link to join my Discord server where you can discuss this Next.js Full Stack project with fellow students, ask questions, and help each other out. Hey guys, a big shout out and thank you to Sentry for making this full stack Next.js educational video series possible. Sentry is defining debuggability in full stack web applications, and I consider Sentry to be an essential part of my tech stack. From error reporting, logging, and tracking to identifying performance issues with tracing, to user session replays, and much more, Sentry will help you write and ship code that delivers exceptional user experiences. Follow the Sentry links in the video description or just visit Sentry.io and use the code davegray to get 3 months of the Sentry team plan for free. In this Next.js Full Stack Project series, I'm using the same tech stack that I've been working with on a major project at my job over the past year. For viewers, students, and subscribers that have asked what I work with on a daily basis, this is definitely the tutorial series to watch. I've got the user stories open, and today we should finally complete our user story number 4, that is show a real-time open tickets page after login. When we add data polling, it will pull in live updates to our table for the tickets. And we'll save our last 2 that we haven't checked off yet, replace current sticky note system, which essentially means we've completed the application and deployed it. And then the other one we haven't checked off yet is desktop mode is most important, but the app should be usable on tablet devices as well. We'll just check those in the last lesson before we're actually going to deploy. So we'll go ahead and check those off at the end of the series, essentially. But for now, we will be completing number 4 today. Okay, I've got the application running with the code that we had at the end of lesson 7. And this is our tickets table, which is our default view after we log into the application. But we might want to make some changes. And one of the things we really need to add, one of the remaining last features we need to add, is live updates to this table, data polling, if you will. Because imagine several techs working at the repair shop that all have this open on their screen, or at least in one of their tabs. And they're not always going to refresh with the refresh button up here in the browser. They just want to see a live update every now and then when possible new tickets are added, especially those ones that they are assigned, for example. So we want to add that to this system, and we can do that with data polling. That is checking the database at regular intervals. Now, we'll set it for a very short interval as we test it out, maybe just a few seconds. But something like every 5 minutes would probably work for this application because they're not going to need to check every second for a new ticket, and you don't want to have a bunch of unnecessary data requests and transfers. However, about every 5 minutes would let every tech, of course, see an update to their table if a new ticket came in with their name assigned to it. So that's really the goal of this additional feature today. Okay, we're back in VS Code. I'm going to scroll up till we find our hooks directory because we're going to create a new hook today. We'll add that file in, and I'm going to call this usepolling.ts. Now notice that shadcn has the file name structure use-toast, but I prefer, at least for the ones I create, to use camel case. So I've got use, which is lowercase, and then capital P for polling.ts. Okay, inside of this file, we're going to import use effect, which is going to come from React. After that import, we also need to import use router, and that's going to come from Next navigation. Then we'll start our function with export function use polling. This is going to accept a couple of params. One is the interval itself in milliseconds. So I'll just call that ms, and that's a number. Let's give it a default value just in case it's not passed in, and we'll set that to 60,000, which 60,000 milliseconds is just 60 seconds or 1 minute. Then we're also going to have a search param value that is passed in. So search param, that's possibly a string, but we'll also make it optional. So we'll also assign null. I'm going to press Alt-Z to wrap this down, also Control-B to hide the file tree. Then after that, let's go ahead and start our function. Inside the function, we're going to say const router, equals use router. After that, let's go ahead and create our use effect. And I know it's kind of cool to say you don't need use effect anymore, but there are certain times that you actually do. I mean, it was created for a reason, and this is one of those times. It's a good reason to have use effect here. So what we're going to do is set an interval. So I'll say interval ID. I'm going to set this equal to set interval. And now that receives a function. And inside this function, let's go ahead and put a console log. We'll try to remember to remove this before deploying. But we'll say interval running, just so we can see that in the console of the browser when the interval runs. And then we'll say if there is no search param, then we'll put another console log here and say refreshing data. So why am I checking for the search param? Well, for example, if I'm viewing search results, I don't really want the live update to refresh at that point because, of course, that would also change things in my table. So what I want to do is get those specific results. But then if I go back to just my open tickets, essentially, without a search param, the default search, then I want to see those updates. So I don't want the refreshing of the data to interfere while I'm searching for results. And of course, you could do this a different way if you want to, but that is the way I think I would prefer it, and it makes sense to me. After that, router.refresh, and that will actually get the new data. So it will request data once again in the server component, send it down to our client components like our React table. Okay, now, after we've got the ID here, or the interval ID, we need to say, okay, what is the interval? How many milliseconds will it run at? So you pass that in here as the second param after the function. So there's the milliseconds. Now we need a cleanup function in the use effect. So we'll have return. Here comes the function. We just clear interval, and we pass in the interval ID that we created above. And so that will clear the interval out and possibly start over if it needs to, depending. And let's put in the dependency array the search param. So if the search param changes, in other words, if it's removed, for example, or if it exists, that would, of course, cause this to rerun. Also, the milliseconds, if somehow that would change. And I'm not going to put in a setting that would change those milliseconds, although that could be done. At the same time, we will still get one of those annoying dependency messages from ESLint, because we're not passing in the router. But if we did pass in the router, it would re-render every time anyway, because that is not just a static value, it's an object. So we're able to call things with dot notation on it. That would be a problem. So what we really need to do is just put in our ESLint exception here. So ESLint dash disable dash line and react dash hooks slash exhaustive dash deps. And that will just avoid a build error because we didn't put router in there. Router is not one that we want to include in there. So this is just one of those times. Okay, that is our use polling hook. So we pass in how many milliseconds, and we pass in whatever the search param is. And of course, if it exists, then we don't want to call the router refresh. Otherwise, we will. And of course, now we need to apply this in our client component, the ticket table. So let's go back to the file tree, scroll up in our directory here till we're at tickets. Here's the form, ticket search, ticket table. That's what we need. Once again, hiding the file tree for some extra room. Let's start at the top. We're already importing use router, I believe. Yes. We also need something else from Next Navigation, and that is use search params. Okay, with that hook imported, now let's go ahead and scroll down, and let's also call it here. So const search params equals use search params. Now I prefer to go just a little bit lower after our other instances here of state, and then of course call it. I think we can here before the column help header array and helper and all of that. So let's set it right here. And then, of course, we haven't imported use polling yet either. So I guess I need to do that up here at the top. Let's just put it here by these other hooks. So I will import use polling. from our hooks directory. Now I'll scroll back down to where I made that space. We're not receiving really anything from the hook. We just call it. So use polling. Here I'm going to pass in, I believe we put in 1 minute before, but let's just do 5 seconds to test this out. After that, we'll call search params.get, and we're looking for the specific param search text. And so that's what we'll pass in as the search param to the use polling hook. With all of this in place, there is more we're going to need to change, and I'll show you why, but let's test this much out first so you can see how it works. Okay, I am back in the browser now, and let me go ahead and open the dev console with Control Shift and the letter I, and you can see we're getting those log messages here. We have interval running, refreshing data, interval running, refreshing data. Well, the first thing we want to do is see if we search something, if we have a search param, if it stops refreshing the data. So I'm going to say search for letter D, and now we have search text up here in the top as a param. And now let's see if we continue to get refreshing data over here as well as interval running. Nope, we're just getting interval running because now it's starting to increment a count of how many are running in a row instead of interval running, then refreshing data, then interval running, then refreshing data. So we're just increasing this count now because it's only interval running. So it's not refreshing the data because a search param exists up here. But if we get rid of our search text, now notice the param search text equals is still up here in the URL, but it equals nothing. So that won't evaluate to true. And so now it's going to be interval running, refreshing data, interval running, refreshing data again. Every 5 seconds is what is happening here to our table. Let's just open a second browser window. Okay, so paste in the same address here. So now I've got the tickets. What I want to do is edit it in the current browser. Well, what I want to do is have a list here, edit in the other one, and see how it turns out. So right now, let's go ahead and search for memory, the one that I changed. All right, so it says it's completed now. I'm going to change that back. But before I change it back, notice over here, this is still updating, and we don't even have a param at all. But even if we did have one that said search text equals nothing, it would still be updating. It's only when search text actually has a value. So right now, 15 total results. By the way, this little lightning bolt down here you see in the bottom left from Next.js in dev mode, it flashes too every time this re-renders and updates everything. So you also notice that. But over here, I'm going to say completed no now. I'll save this. Okay, let's come back. We're already at 16 total results, so that happened fast. Let me see how quickly I can change it again. Save, come back. 15, let's see if it switches to 16. No, it was at 16, wasn't it? So it already switched. Okay, one more time. You see here. Let me go right when it flashes. There's the flash of the update. Okay, save the change, come back. 15, now it's 16. So we finally got to see it update. Almost needed to set the interval a little bit larger to switch between the two. But this is a live update. So imagine this being open on another tech's computer, and they make an update and they say one is completed or not completed, then the other tech is going to see that update in their table. Now, there is an issue though. There's something we need to fix, and it's with the table pagination. Because right now, if I go to the next page, every time it refreshes the data, it goes back to the first page. So here I'm at next, I'm gonna refresh, takes me back to the first page again. So we need to fix that along with our polling, but we did already put the data polling in place. We are getting live updates. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. Let's scroll back up to the top. There's something else we need to import here. I'll scroll down to where the hooks are. So besides use state, I also want use memo because we're going to memoize a page index value and we're going to change how that's tracked. We're going to start keeping track of it in the URL, which makes a lot of sense based on how we're getting our data and everything else from the URL as well, like that search text, for example. So let's go ahead and come down here into the ticket table. We're going to have to define the page index. So let me put it after use polling. I'll say const page indexed, and I'm going to name it just like the way that React Table expects to see it. So this is also the name of the property in React Table. Set this equal to use memo. It receives a function. Then inside of use memo, I'm going to say const page equals search params dot get, and now we're going to get the param page. So we're going to start keeping track of what page we're on in the URL, so when it refreshes, it won't change pages on us. Then we're going to either spell return correctly, return page, and we can parse int. This is a ternary, by the way. Then we can parse int and return the actual page number -1 or 0, which is the first page. That's how it keeps track of the index. Now, being a use memo, we do have a dependency array here, and we're going to pass in the search params. And you know what? We can even be more specific than just putting the search params in this dependency array, which is stable, by the way, from Next.js. It will only change if the actual params do. We can put in .get and specify the param we're looking for. So page, just like we did up here. So now only if the page param changes. So that makes sense in the dependency array for use memo. Now let's scroll down to our use React Table hook, where we can use the page index in the pagination state. And we're also going to change that pagination state a little bit. Right now, we've got pagination inside of the initial state, but we're going to be tracking that just a little bit differently. So we'll want to keep it in the regular state. So I'll start by just cutting it out of the initial state here and putting it under column filters. And then inside of pagination here, I'm also going to put page index and just put a comma after that. Now we can go ahead and remove the initial state because we're no longer using it here inside of the use React Table hook. And now we need to scroll down and update our logic inside of the previous and next buttons that we have. So here at the very bottom, we had previous and next. Right now they're fairly simple. We have table.previousPage or table.nextPage. We need to put a little more logic in here because now we're handling this from the URL param that will have page, or the search param in the URL that will have page. So let's go ahead and start changing the onClick. I'm going to delete table.previousPage, and instead we'll start a function body here, and inside I'm going to say const new index. I'm going to set this equal to table.getState.pagination.pageIndex -1. So that would take us back one page, as this is the previous button. Now we'll say table.setPageIndex. We'll pass in the new index. After that, let's say const params equals new URL search params. Pass in the search params that we have .toString. Now after this, we'll take the router. I'm sorry, we need to have params. I almost missed a line. We have params.set. We're going to set the page param. Here we'll have new index +1 .toString. And again, the +1 is because the index actually starts at 0. So we're in the URL, we're going to have page equals 1, 2. So it makes sense to users, not so much page 0, for example. And then we need router.replace. And we want replace, not push, because we don't want to continually add to the back button or forward button browser history. We just want to change the table page, not the history for the browser. Now, you could use push if you want the browser history to change, but really it's just going to show that same page because we also have other things kind of on the page. This is in the table in a way is like a single page application. So to me, it doesn't make sense to change the browser history for the back and forward buttons. So now inside of replace, let's use a template literal, and we'll go ahead and have a question mark and then a $sign to insert our value, and we'll have params.toString. And of course, we need to call that toString. After that, let's put in a comma, and let's put in scroll, and and set that to false, so we're not always scrolling to the top, for example. Now, the way our app is set up, that shouldn't be an issue anyway, because we're pretty much seeing it all in the one page by limiting it to 10. But say if you had 100 in the table or whatever, you're not always going to scroll to the top that way. Okay, so that is the logic for the previous button. Now this is going to be very, very similar for the back button. So I'm going to just copy this entire function, Control C, come down here, or I said back to the next button. We had previous and this is next. But the very first line here, so page index, this would be +1. Everything else, I believe, is going to stay the same. I'll just verify that. We're going to have table.setPageIndex to new indexed. Const params is going to equal the new URL search params to string, params.set page. New index +1 still makes sense here because we're calculating the index here. We're just changing the display so it's more user-friendly here. And then router.replace, scroll false. That is all correct. So that's all we should need. Now, while we're thinking of the refreshing data at a regular interval, it's also easy to go ahead and add a button that will let text refresh the table data anytime they want to. So let's go ahead and do that too. I'm just going to highlight the reset sorting button, Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy that down. Let's go ahead and change this top one from reset sorting to refresh data. And then inside of the onClick here, all we need to do is call router refresh. And that will let any tech manually refresh the data for the table anytime they want to. So if that 5-minute interval, for example, isn't enough, maybe they just want to pop open their tab, hit the refresh button and see the latest. This will enable them to do so. Now, before we go back and check this in the browser, I'm actually going to switch that use polling interval from 5 seconds, which didn't give me a whole lot of time to discuss and change the tabs. I'll change that over to 10 seconds. So that'll give me just a little bit more time in between so we can definitely see the change. All right, let's go back to the browser. I'm back in the browser and we've got 16 total open tickets now, and we're on page 1. So now, if we go over here, just quickly to check out the use polling once again, I'm going to go ahead and open up this memory upgrade ticket. And now that we've got it open, I'll say completed, save it. It is saved. We go back here. We've still got 16 right now, but we should see it update. And we did. It just quickly updated. Now laptop not powering on is the first ticket we see up here. And we've only got 15 total results. Now let's go ahead and go to the next page. We're at the next page now, and you can see it says page equals 2 up here in the URL. And we should still see this go ahead and refresh. And we did. It just blinked right there. So we did see it refresh the data, and we can also open up our dev console over here and continue to see interval running, refreshing data each time. And that will continue to happen right now. So it's only looking for the search text param would be the reason it wouldn't refresh the data. So the page param is not stopping that refresh from happening. And every time it refreshes, we still stay on the page we're supposed to because we're keeping track of that pagination state up here in the URL. So that works out very nicely. We can go back to the first page, of course, go here to the second page. Also, I should point out that we can continue to sort tickets. I can just switch that to Charlie. And well, we don't have any results here on that page for Charlie. So let me go ahead and reset the filters now. Let's go back to the previous page. There we go. So now on page 1, sort for Charlie, and we've got 2 results here for Charlie. Page 1 of 1, 2 total results. The data will refresh and it's not going to reset our filter. So that is also nice, but the data can continue to refresh in the background. And if we clear out the filters, then we'll have all of the data. So let me just give an example of that here. We'll go back to Charlie, only showing those 2 right here. But remember, we had 15 results before I did that. So now if I come back and say, hey, this is open again, we save it. Now we should have 16 here when we clear this out. As a matter of fact, one of those tickets was Charlie's that I just updated. So now we have 3 here. We saw that live update as well. And if I reset the filters, we've got all 16. And here's our refresh button down here. I can go ahead and click that, and you'll see this blink over here in the bottom left. Anytime we do that, it is refreshing the table as well. It calls that router refresh. While we've got the DevTools window open here with the console, let me go ahead and switch this to an iPad view. Not working too much on that right now, but it looks like it's cutting off here. Let me see if I can make it any smaller. So yeah, here we've got the whole thing. We added that extra button, and now this doesn't look quite as good here at the bottom. If we rotate the iPad, the buttons look just fine. I can probably do that at 75%. And you can still see it here. So yeah, the buttons look just fine here, but if I rotate it the other way, and I'll have to go to 50, it doesn't look quite as good. So let's make just a little bit of a change with our layout and these buttons here in Tailwind. Back in VS Code, I am going to scroll down once again till we get down to those buttons that are underneath the table. It comes after the table body. So let's change this first div right now. It's flex, justify between, and item center. Let's go ahead and add just a little bit to that. Let's give it a gap of 1, and let's set this to flex wrap as well. Now after that, we have a div, and that has in our page 1 of 2 and so on kind of content right there. Let's go ahead and remove what we have right here from that div. And then in the paragraph, we'll leave that just the way it is. So we're handling this just a little bit different than we did before. So let's scroll down now. And we're going to have another div, and it's going to wrap around these first 3 buttons. So let me put this div in place. We'll give this a class name equal to flex row, and gap 1. Now after that, I'm actually going to apply the same class to the div inside now as well. But I'll take that closing div and put it after these 3 buttons where we reset data or refresh data, reset sorting, reset filters. And now let's create one more div. Class name equals, and I'm going to put in the exact, not div. I want to put in the exact same values once again. So what I should do, just copy this. It right there, and it's going to wrap around its final 2 buttons. So what we've done is create 2 containers. One container has the previous and next button. The other container has the refresh data, reset sorting, reset filters button. And then there's a container around both of those containers, and that container also contains the page 1 of 2. And so it also has flex wrap. So when things get a little too crowded, it will wrap down as well. So let's see how that looks. And of course, when it comes to CSS, you could do things the way you want. But right now, this does fit. So you can see in this mode, everything does still fit all the way across. And then if we rotate it, it fits as well. So that works. If there was more spacing though, this row of buttons would wrap down to be underneath the 1 of 2. Maybe that's how you would want it. Maybe not. Maybe you would want to set a static width on all of these buttons so they're all the same size and then stack them up like a tower. You could do whatever you wanted based on how you set the breakpoints, and of course also how you work with Flexbox. So just my quick fix for those. Back in VS Code, and we've added our new feature for the day, and we've handled the changes it applied to pagination as well. We're ready to go ahead and add a few things or a few changes as well to our navigation. One of those things is just a loading component that we haven't added. We have several other things like the notfound.tsx, but we could put a loading.tsx in here that would apply itself to the entire app when a loading screen needs to be shown. And of course, you can put those further down in your segments if you want different types of loading screens as well. But I'm just going to apply one large loading screen that shows anytime that's needed. So let's go ahead, let's click on the notfound.tsx and then just create another file here called loading.tsx. Inside this file, we're going to import loader circle. That comes from Lucid React. After that, let's say export default function, and we can just call this loading. After that, we will return Now inside our parentheses of the return, let's start with a div, and we'll give this a class name, and we'll set this equal to fixed, then inset -0 z-50, so we know it stays on top, bg background /80. So that 80 is the opacity. So what we're going to do is put a background, but it's also going to let you still see what's underneath a little bit, but it will indicate, of course, that you can't click on the header, for example, because this is going to cover the full page. You can see I gave it a fixed position there. Inside of this, we'll have another div, class name, set this equal to width of full, height of dynamic viewport height, full height. Now grid and place content center. What we're going to do is put our big loading circle right in the middle of the page. So now we'll have loader circle, class name equals, let's give this h-48, width -48 as well. Give it the animate spin class. Give it the color text foreground /20. So a little bit of opacity on that also. Then we can close out the component, Alt-Z to wrap that down. That is the full loading component. And now we might see this flash and see it just for a little bit if I were to reload the page. But one way we can keep it on the screen and test it is to just load it in to one of our routes here. And the one that we're really not using inside of RS is home. We're just redirecting there. So let's go ahead and change that for now. Let's import our loading page that comes from app loading. And then here, we should be able to return loading and see what that looks like if we go to the /home route. So let's go back to the browser and check that out. Okay, I'm back in the browser. I'm going to change our localhost port 3000 /tickets to /home. Go ahead and pull this up, and here is our loading page. So you can see the loading spinner, you can see the header, you can see everything in the header, but it is clearly not as easily seen. And of course, I don't get a pointer when I mouse over any of it, so you can't click on any of it. This just disables everything else basically on the page and gives a loading screen. So you'll only briefly see this, of course, when React suspense kicks in, when the app is waiting on something to load. And Next.js handles that automatically by creating that loading file. So now we can see how it works in our app on other pages. We can also get rid of this home route as we won't need it anymore. So let's go back into VS Code and do that first, and then we'll come back and just see a brief flash of how this loader works. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. Like I said, we can delete the home segment. So I close the file, but let's scroll up here to the actual directory that we have named home, and I'm going to press the delete key and just remove it. Now we may need to go ahead and restart our dev server because it may not be expecting that. I don't know if it'll cause an error, but it easily could. So I've removed that. We also want to go to our components, and I believe in the header we were linking back to that as well. So let's find any /homes like we have here. Hide that file tree. Okay. Control F to bring up our Finder. There are two instances of /home in the page, and I can see both of them. I'm just going to change them to tickets. We can still leave the label home and the home icon, that's fine. We're just making the tickets page our home. So we'll go ahead and change this here as well to /tickets. Now there's one other consideration, and I can't show you mine, and that's because it's in the environment variables for kind. So we had a value in there that ended with the /home URL. So you want to go back into your .env.local file. I'll find mine here. Here it is. And you want to make that change. Go ahead and change the /home to /tickets. Now that's an environment variable. When we deploy, we'll have to put these environment variables into our deployment at Vercel as well. But for now, just here in dev mode, you'll want to change that /home URL to /tickets in your .env local. Go ahead and do that before we look at the results back in the web browser. Okay, I just changed my .env value, and I'll show you what the variable is real quick. It is the kind post login redirect URL. That's the one you want to change to now end in /tickets. Okay, after that, let's go ahead and head back to the browser and check out our changes. I'm back in the browser. We were already on the /home page, and it looks like it didn't cause a problem. It's just now a page not found. That's okay. So let's go to /tickets, load the page. We briefly saw the loader as the page loaded. If you didn't see that, let's go ahead and hit refresh. And yep, it briefly loads. And now we're ready to, of course, use the tickets table. And if we want to click on ticket or the home, it goes directly to tickets, no longer a redirect at all. So let me go ahead and click on this first ticket. And there it went ahead and brought us to the ticket page. I'll hit the back button and it goes back. So we've already kind of pre-rendered these here as we were working with this in dev mode. We may not even see that loader again, but you will briefly see it if you refresh the page. So it does happen. It does show up when it's needed. You may see it a little bit more when it's actually hosted on the web, depending on how far that data has to travel between the user's browser and the host, for example. So it could be handy. It's a nice little feature to see that loader just occasionally. And back in VS Code, we were on the not found page when we deleted the /home route, and then the browser was still there. And so one thing I noticed that on that not found page, that's inside the app directory and then find not-found.tsx. One thing I noticed is we didn't have a link to go anywhere. Of course, we could hit the back button, for example. But let's go ahead and put a link in here that will just link back to the home page, which of course would be the tickets page now. So if we don't have link at the top, let's go ahead and import link. That's going to come from next link. And then let's go ahead and use link down here. So we'll have link with the href equal to /tickets, a class name equal to text-center, and then hover underline. And then inside the link, we'll put, let's use an H3, since we've got, I believe, an H2 up here above for page not found. I think we have our H1 in the header that shows up on most pages. However, it doesn't show up on the not found page. So that's a consideration if we want to. We'll just say go home, but it will take us back to the tickets page, which is our home page now. So let's check that out in the browser as well. So here I am back on the tickets page. We'll go back to /home, which should be not found. Now it says go home. And when we mouse over that, we've got a nice little link. Go home, it loads the tickets table once again. Okay, now we're ready to do a little bit of refactoring on the application before we move on to the next video where we will deploy the application. Now, right now, of course, we're still seeing this reload every 10 seconds, so we may want to go back in VS Code also and switch that to that 300,000 milliseconds, or what would be every 5 minutes essentially. So we'll do that when we go back as well. But one thing I've noticed here is sometimes, like this hard drive replacement title, what if we had a longer title even, it's not fitting in here too well. We can actually control the width of these different columns. Like we've got a lot of width here for the date or for completed, that's just an icon, and we don't have nearly as much as we need for the title. So let's go back in, refactor our table to adjust the width of the columns so we like it just a little bit better. Of course, note that if it ever is too long, it will wrap down to the next line automatically. So that's also nice. Back in VS Code, I'm going to close the not found header, the loading TSX, and we're back at the ticket table, which is where we want to be for this refactor. Let's scroll up and let's first change that use polling millisecond value. I think we're at 10 seconds right now. So 300,000, I believe, would be every 5 minutes, just like 60,000 was every minute. So that will adjust that to a more reasonable value. Now from there, let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to change the column widths. Just like we have the column headers array set, we know what we want the headers to be. We can set the widths right underneath, but we're going to do it with an object instead of an array. So I'll say const column widths, set this equal to an object, and here I'm going to say completed. Let's give that 150. Now React Table just takes these number values. So if we're thinking 150 pixels, we would just say 150 instead of 150px, for example. Ticket date is also a column that I thought was small, so I'll also set it to 150. But the title, we definitely wanted bigger, so we'll set that to 250. The tech, 225. Email, which the tech was also an email, so we'll set it to 225. And let's just not set anything specific for first and last name. Of course, we didn't have anything specific set before. React Table will adjust kind of evenly or distribute evenly with what is left, is what it looks like it does to me at least. But now that we've defined our column widths, we actually need to apply them. And we can do that just by scrolling down into the JSX here for the table. And then we'll get to the table head area here. I need to Alt-Z to wrap this down. As you can see, this starts to go off the screen. And when we get to the table head, we need to actually apply, not a class, but a style prop. And we can just insert the style here. So 2 curly braces, then we'll say width, we'll say header.get size. But that's not going to work on its own because we haven't actually assigned those column widths in that object to the header yet. So here in between, when we defined our columns, let's find that spot. Here is the ID and the header, for example. We also need to define a size. So now we'll add the size prop right here. Let's say column widths. And now we'll have a bracket, like an array bracket, column name, but we can't just pass that in. See, TypeScript doesn't like that. So we have to say column name as key of type of column widths. Now TypeScript is okay with that, but still after that, we need to add a null Koleskian operator and just say otherwise it is undefined. Okay, with that comma in place, now we're pulling in the widths we set in the object based on the column name. So we get the correct width based on our object. And then as you saw, I did this step first, we actually insert, let me find the table head, there it is, the style prop, and we call header get size, which we just assigned in the column, and it will insert that correct width here. And by doing this in the head, we don't have to do it in the table cell. However, you could also put the style prop here for the table cell as well if you wanted to. Let's go back and look at our table in the browser. Back in the browser, and this looks much better to me. Notice like hard drive replacement isn't wrapping down to 2 lines. It's got just a little bit more room for the title, a little more room for the tech email and the regular email of the customer. Everything's spaced just a little bit better. And so you could adjust that once again how you want to. Many other features for React Table that you could actually learn about in the docs. As I'd mentioned in the previous lessons, you could make a full course about nothing but React Table. Many things you can do, but this was a nice adjustment and I felt like it was needed. Another change I feel is needed came from a YouTube comment. It's something I had noticed, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to change it. But since we've had a comment about it, I think I will. What happens really when you change here, when you filter, let's say filter by my name here. Notice we've only got one result now in the table. It says page 1 of one result. But when you look over here in the title, it says there's still 16 possibilities. Now, some may want it that way. You may still want to know there's 16 different title possibilities in your actual search results. So when you reset the filters, you see them all. But the request I got in the comments, and many may want this as well, is when you filter this down, say just one result, really, all of these numbers should probably just be 1 to show there's only 1 left. So they want to know how many remains still in this area, for example. So if I reset the filter, let me just put in something basic here, like the letter D. Let's put in something else like, well, let's do it in a different field here. Let's do the letter A. And we filter by that, it doesn't work. So we pick one of these specifically. There we go. So we've got Alice, we've got 3. Okay, so now that we have 3, this should show that, hey, there's just one possibility here because these are all the same. This should show, instead of 16, show 3 different possibilities because we have 3 different titles. and so on. So let's go ahead and fix that back in VS Code, and then we'll come back and try it out. Okay, back in VS Code, and to get our filtered data counts to change, we've got to make one change in the ticket table itself, and then the rest actually goes into our filter component. So let's make that one change here in the ticket table first. Let's find where we're using the filter component. There it is on line 183 right now. So we need to pass in a little bit more to filter here. So I'm going to put this on separate lines because we actually need to access the filtered state of the table inside of the filter to show that new filtered data count. So let's call this prop filtered rows. And inside of filtered rows, we're going to call table.get filtered row model. And from there, we can get the rows and we can map over the rows. And then for each row, we will say row.getValue, and then we'll pass in the header.column.id. So this is how we're actually going to get an array of the values that we have already transformed inside of the accessor function of the table. And that's what we want to pass in. And then we can, of course, look for unique values after that and so on. But right now, we just want to make sure we're getting the filtered values that have already been transformed. And that's what this will do. Of course, we have a red squiggly here because we haven't put the filtered rows prop on the filter component yet. But we'll do that next. So I'm going to click filter here, control click, and that just opened up the filter component. Now we need to change our props here at the top to go ahead and accommodate filtered rows being passed in as well. Since it is the data that has already been transformed, we know this is string data as we were transforming that in the accessor function of the React table. So let's go ahead and add filtered rows here. It's received into the function. And after it's received, we're going to change how we define the sorted unique values. But to do that, we first want to define something else. I'm going to say const unique filtered values. Let's set this equal to new set, pass in our filtered rows. Now, a set will remove duplicates. It can't have duplicates. So that helps us get the unique filtered values. After that, we're going to set the sorted unique values in a different way. So it's not going to be column.getFacetedUniqueValues.keys. So let's just delete that out of the array.from, and let's pass in the unique filtered values. And we will sort those, and that gives us our sorted unique values. So this is also going to update our data list, so we won't have all those options show up. So it will match the count that we're showing. So now let's scroll down and update that placeholder count as well. Alt-Z to wrap it down. Now, one thing I want to point out here, if you're happy with the way that we did this before and it's giving us the count, I did this in an overly complicated way, really. We didn't need to quite do all of this. Let's go ahead and look at how we could have done this. Have column.getFacetedUniqueValues. Let's get rid of that filter altogether there. And once you do that, you're already working with a map. So you could just have column.getFacetedUniqueValues, and then at the end, what a map has is .size. And that would give you the same value as we had before. So if you didn't want to change it, but you could use this instead of that overly complicated way that I did it before. So it's always nice to find a newer, simpler way to do the same thing. So yes, you can see this returns a map. It's a map, so it has the size property there that you can call just to get that value. Okay, but now we're not going to use this either. But notice up here, this is a set. Unique filtered values is a set. It also has a size property, so that makes this fairly easy as well. So instead of column.getFacetedUniqueValues, we're just going to put in unique filtered values that we have above, and we can still call the size property, and we'll get the value we're looking for. So that's even easier, and we're getting the update that we expected up here. Looks like I still need to save my change in the ticket table, but after that, Let's go back to the browser and see if this works as expected. I'm back in the browser and the changes are already in place from the results that we had. So now you can see there's 3 separate titles and it says search and it has 3 in parentheses. And when I click here, it only gives the 3 options that are visible here. And that's what we expected this change to do. Right now it says there's only 1 option here for email. And likewise, our filter was Alice, so we're not seeing the option there, but she has the same last name, of course, in all 3 of these. So there's only 1 possible last name. Now, if we reset the filters, we see all those numbers jump back up to all the different possibilities. So this is working as expected. It's updating the count as we filter. So it updates the count for all of the different columns as we filter the data. Okay, the next refactor to challenge, let's go to this ticket that has my email here as the tech, my Gmail. And after we go there, see the tech ID is not coming in. And we identified that in another video as well. And the reason that is because I inserted manually with SQL back in the Neon console, the SQL editor, I inserted my email and it had capital letters in it as well. And so what we need to do is be calling 2 lowercase in a couple of places in this application to ensure that never happens. We could have emails coming in from the email data coming in from kind that keeps track of our users, our techs. We could also have it coming in from our own database like I did, where I edited it myself in the console. So we have to also consider that's a possibility. We want to be checking that data along the way, because what happens with this menu is the email that's passed in as data for the record needs to match the possibilities that are in the select menu in the values. And see here, you can see this has some capital letters. So that's why it didn't match when we clicked and came over here. So let's make the changes that will make sure this never happens. Okay, back in VS Code, I'm going to close the filter component file and the use polling. Let's keep ticket table open here, but we want to go to the ticket form. And that's where we'll be working with the select input that receives the tech. And as a matter of fact, here it is right here. So I will Control B to hide the file tree. And you can see the data that it receives is the text array, as well as, of course, possible the new dash ticket at example.com is the other possibility besides the existing text. So we're receiving that text data from kind back in the page.tsx file, where it gets that data from their database. And then, of course, we bring it in. So here we're passing in text that we receive. Here's the definition of text. And it's from the users as we map over the users. So we need to set this to lowercase before it ever gets into our form as well. So I'm going to press Alt-Z to wrap this line down. But what we really want to do as we create this array of text to send into the ticket form, we want to just set all of these to lowercase just in case any is coming in from kind that is not. So to do that, we'll go ahead and use optional chaining here and call to lowercase. And that's the value, really. That's what matches up in the select menu, but I would prefer to also see the same thing in the description. So I'm going to add it to both. But truly the value that will match up is the ID that would be set in the options of that select menu. So now we've added that to both. So that will help that data get passed correctly to the form to match up. But it's also going to help if we make a change in the form itself. So if we go to ticket form, hide the file tree again, let's look at our default values. And as I scroll up here, we've got ticket, optional chaining, tech. So this is coming in from the record from our database. So now we already looked at the data that's coming in from kind in the user database there. Now let's look at what's already assigned to the ticket. Maybe somebody makes an update to a record manually like I did in the SQL editor and puts in capital letters. So here we also want to say .to lowercase. And yep, we've got, nope, it stopped the red squiggly right here. So we're making sure if we have tech, then, of course, we can go ahead, it's a string, we can set the to lowercase without optional chaining. Now, at this point, we've handled where the data comes from, because you don't type into that select field in the form. So we're not as worried about that, but we're setting it to lowercase here, and we're setting it to lowercase as it comes in from the user's database from kind. So we should be good. I had made a comment in that original video where the issue was identified that maybe you should go ahead and also use to lowercase in the action. Here in app, we go to actions and we are saving the ticket. When we save tech, you could call to lowercase there as well, whether it was updated or inserted, but I don't think you need to, because if we handle that data coming in properly, it's already going to be lowercase by the time it reaches the save ticket action. Now let's go back and see if that made a difference in how the email shows up for the tech on that ticket. And I'm back in the browser and the change has already applied itself. And yes, the correct email is now showing up under tech ID because it matches. We no longer have an email in here that has capital letters. Everything is taken care of. Now let's quickly go to the customers page, which we haven't looked at for a while, and let's search for customers. It should go ahead and be ready. There we go. So I'm going to search for just the @ symbol to bring up all the customers. And notice what we've got here. We've got no order whatsoever. Maybe the order they were entered into the database, but it's not alphabetical by last name or by first name. So what would we do if we were looking for somebody? We didn't apply filters to this, so it would be nice to have this in some type of order on this table as well. What we didn't do was apply an order by clause to our drizzle query. So let's fix that quickly. Back in VS Code, I'm going to scroll down to the lib directory. And once we get there, we should be able to open our queries directory, then get customer search results. From there, all we need to do is chain dot, if I could get my fingers on the right keys, dot order by, and then we want to order by customers dot last name. Save that query. Okay, with the changes in place, let's go back to the browser. I'm back in the browser looking at our customer results once again, and now they are alphabetical by last name. And so now there is some order to this table. And of course, you could apply other features to this table just like we did the tickets table if you want to. However, I think it would be enough to probably just have the order by last name. Maybe you want pagination, of course, as you got more and more customers added here to the database for the repair shop. But overall, this helps quite a bit. Now let's head back to the ticket page, the home page, if you will, and we need to talk about permissions. A couple of things came up while we were dealing with permissions in the application, and we had one good comment that I quickly want to discuss, so let's go back to VS Code. Back in VS Code, I will close Get Customer Search Results, and we are looking at the ticket form. So I'll also close the ticket table. I believe this is the page.tsx, yes, that leads into the ticket form, and this is what we want, and this is also what I want to discuss. We're already in the ticket segment, and at this point, we already know if we have manager permissions or not. We're getting that from kind up here above. So we're checking is manager in this component. You can see here on line 54, we're defining is manager. So we know if we have a manager or not. Already figured that out. There's no reason to figure that out again in the ticket form. And if you look at the ticket form, instead of passing is manager down, I went ahead and said, hey, if we have an array of text, that means we could choose who to assign, then we know we have a manager. So it's not a big deal. This could be preference, but it is a separation of concerns issue. And that was the nice comment that I got on YouTube. And I agree with that. Really, we should already just let the server component handle that. And we can pass the is manager prop down. So what we want to do is remove is manager here altogether. And then above, we need to add that possible prop. I'm in the ticket form component, by the way. So is manager, and we'll set this to Boolean, but it could also be undefined as kind has it. And of course, we're receiving this value from kind at that point. So what I'm going to do here is put is manager, and just by default, we'll set it to false. So unless we pass in a true value, it's always going to be false. That gives us just a little bit more information about the is manager as we look at this component as well. And now we can see we've got a TypeScript error over here as I've got a little red dot. And that's because of the way we were defining isManager in this component before, because we were looking at the text array to do it. Now I've scrolled down and we're not seeing the error yet. I need to wrap the code. Let me hide the file tree, which will help too. And you can see the red squiggly is on text itself. Because we're using text in here and we haven't verified we're actually received the text or that they exist yet. Before we didn't have to do that because we used text to define isManager. So here I need to say and text. So now that gets rid of the type error. So we don't want to allow the selection of a tech unless the text exists and isManager is true. So those are the changes we need to make in the ticket form itself, but we still need to pass that down here up above. So we're not getting any TypeScript errors because remember it is optional. But basically here is our block that says if isManager is true, then we need to pass it on to the component. So isManager equals isManager. Otherwise, it's essentially false and it's optional, so it can be undefined, which will still evaluate as false. So I believe that is the only place we need to pass it in. Let's check for how many times we see ticket form in this page. We've got an isManager here as well. Okay, return ticket form. So we do need to add isManager here also. isManager. Anytime isManager is true, where we need to add it. Okay, there's two instances of ticket form. We see it in the title of the function. Now isManager is true. We're passing isManager in. isManager is true. We're passing isManager in. Those look like the changes we need to make. Now we're not going to see any change in the browser whatsoever based on this change. So this was more of a refactoring just based on the logic, keeping that separation of concerns and just passing down a new prop instead of doing any new calculation in a component that really didn't need to do that calculation. Now, if you remember from that permissions lesson, one other thing that I do want to cover is the customers form. And that's because I gave the example in the permissions lesson for client-side permissions because we used the useKind browser client hook, which is a possibility. And I definitely wanted to show how to do that. However, even during that lesson, I said my preference is what we're doing with the ticket segment, which is server-side permissions. Get all the data you need and render on the server first. And that really comes into play here in this customer form because we see a little bit of a loading state. Here's the isLoading. So if we look for that here in the component, here is the checkbox with label. So we see a small loading state before it determines whether it's going to show that checkbox or not. And what happens is a content layout shift because we see loading and then it either disappears if it's not going to show it or it goes ahead and shows it. So if it doesn't show it, the content shifts just a little bit. We can avoid all of that by just getting the data and rendering on the server first. And that's what Next.js is good at. So let's go ahead and take that approach and just change this whole segment, use the same approach the ticket segment is, and not use the client side hook. So to do that, I need to start actually in the page.tsx. So our customers, form directory, and then page.tsx. And let's start here by bringing in the correct import from kind. So I am going to, lowercase, import, and I want get kind server session. And we'll use that, and it should, let me wrap this down just so I can see the full, from kind-auth-nextjs/server. That is the one we want. After that, let's decide where to put this. Now our generate metadata, that looks fine. We don't need to change that function. So we're in the customer form page here for the page.tsx, and we'll decide where to check that. I think we can do it right after the beginning of the try block, before we even check the customer ID params. I don't think it's necessary to have the customer ID param for this because we might just have a new customer, and it's not using that customer at all. So we don't early exit this function either way or redirect somewhere else. So let's go ahead and say const and get permission. And I need curly braces and not brackets. Let's try that once again. Const get permission. We're going to set this equal to get kind server session and call that. Now we don't need to await that. Now we'll have const manager permission. Let's set this equal to await get permission. And we're looking for the manager role. And remember, any admins will already also be assigned the manager role is what we had decided for the application. So in kind, if somebody's an admin, they just get assigned two different roles, or permissions, I should say, not roles. I don't want to use those quite interchangeably because they're not the same in kind. So they get assigned the manager permission and an admin permission if they're an admin, or if they're a manager, they only get the manager permission. Okay, now we'll say const is manager equals manager permission optional chaining and is granted. So at this point, we should have our Boolean true or false. It's Boolean or undefined, and that's what is expected. Now, this component is not quite as deep or as detailed as the segment for the tickets, so this isn't quite as difficult. Here, we've got just two different places that the customer form is rendered, and if we search for that, we can verify there's the two there. So there's the import that has two right there. Customer form page. Yep, just these two. So inside here of the customer form props, let's go ahead and pass is manager. And it's going to receive this in both instances. There is our is manager. And once again, is manager here. And of course, we're going to need to set up the customer form to receive this prop as well. But this is all we really needed to change inside of the page.tsx. So let's go to the customer form itself, and now we'll scroll up to make the first change at least. And here we've got prop types, or type props, good grief. Okay, customer, and now we want is manager, and this is going to be Boolean or undefined. And we can set this the same way we did in the other form. So we're going to have is manager, and we'll set it to false if true is, or if it's not passed in. Now here we were already defining it, right? So we don't need to do that now. And we don't need the use kind browser client at all. So we could go up and remove that import also. And now we can see another red dot here where we need to make a change inside of the component itself. So let's scroll down. We're not waiting on an is loading status at all. At this point, we're already getting the data on the server and it's rendering the form as it will be. We'll avoid that content layout shift. So we can delete all of that and just check to see, okay, do we have is manager? Is that true? And do we have a customer ID? And if so, then we can put in the active checkbox to show up on the page. And back in the browser, let's go ahead and search for customers. And we'll search just for my customer, for example. I'll click on this. Now, I should have possibly gone ahead and shown that little loading state once again, but I know you've seen it in past videos. But now, since this customer exists already, the active checkbox is here. We didn't see a loading state. It was just instantly there. And if we reload, see the loading screen that we expect when we reload the app, but we don't see a content layout shift or a little paragraph here that just has loading ... We didn't see that. Likewise, if we came here and just chose new customer, we saw it shift as we changed the form, but we won't see it shift as we look. So now, new customer choice and no loading state there. It wasn't determining whether to show that active checkbox or not. So that's the change we made. And of course, we're going to see a small little loading flash. You may see it longer once it's deployed, but we saw that full loading screen. We do expect that. So this is working as expected. If we go back, let me search for customers one more time. I'll look for Jane, for example. Click there, and the active was there instantly, even though it wasn't there before. No decision is made. It's already rendered on the server. Okay, while we're working with the customer's form, there are a couple of other refactors that we want to do. One, notice if I click the customer icon at the top right, we can search for customers, or we can go to New Customer. We're currently on the Edit Customer screen. When I go to New Customer, it goes to the New Customer form, or at least it changes the title, but we still have Jane's data, the customer we were on, that we were editing. So if we go directly from the Edit page to the New Customer page, this form state isn't quite updating the way we want it to. So let's fix that. Back in VS Code, I am in the customer form. So let's scroll to the top or near the top where we have some imports. We want to add one more import to this component. So we're going to import use search params, and it should come from Next Navigation. Now, after that, we're also going to need use effect. So we'll import use effect from React. And now that we've added the extra imports, let's scroll down just a little bit. Underneath where we define toast, let's go ahead and say const search params equals use search params. And after that, let's define a variable called has customer ID, because we're looking for that customer ID in the URL. So we're going to set this equal to search params.has, then we can look for customer ID. Okay, now that we have the has customer ID, we can evaluate how we want to set the default values of the form. Now, to start out with, we are checking, of course, the customer, and if it doesn't have a value, we always have this fallback to the empty string or the other values we want. But let's go ahead and create an empty values object. So this would be const empty values. And we'll set this also equal to the insert customer schema type. And with this object, I'm going to quickly paste these in just so you don't have to see me type these out, but it's the same properties that we have here in the default values. And besides that, it's just the values that you see over here to the right in the default values. However, we want to keep the default values this way just in case one of these fields doesn't have a value, so it can default over to this too. But this would be completely empty values here. And now let's just adjust that default values definition to use a ternary. And when we use that ternary, we'll actually be checking to see if we have the customer ID. So here, let's put as customer ID, and then the question mark. So if we do have a customer ID, we're going to use the default values we've been using. And as you might expect, if we don't, we're just going to use those empty values. So that updates the form state or the default form state, but we still need the use effect or when that customer ID value might change. So underneath where we have the form defined, let's put in our use effect. We'll say use effect, put in the arrow function, and inside the function we'll say form.reset. And now we'll check once again, has customer ID. And if we do, we're going to use the default values. There we go. And if we don't, we'll use the empty values for the form reset. And now after that, let's decide what we want to pass in here. Well, we're going to check in the dependency array anytime the search param changes. So search params.get, we'll be looking at that customer ID value. And that should do what we need to do. So let's go back to the browser and see if we've fixed our issue. Okay, I'm back in the browser and we currently have a new customer form. So let's go to the Search Customers page. And from Search Customers, let's look for Jane once again. Bring up Jane, and now we're on Edit Customer 2 where we have Jane's information. So now let's navigate to the new customer form. And yes, now we do not have Jane's data, so that does work as we need it to. Okay, we're now ready for our last refactor, and it's also a dependency fix. So we have to fix the dependencies before we can refactor the code, and I'll tell you why. It's because in the previous lesson or two, we upgraded to Next.js 15.1. Now, if you're watching this in the future, this may not be an issue, but Next.js 15.1 broke some things in Next Safe Action. And so recently Next Safe Action has been updated as well to handle those changes. So we're going to update both those packages. But let me show you the error just in case if you were wondering what was going on somewhere in between those times. We'll just put in some information here, and I'm going to cause a duplicate entry error, but really this happens with any error if you're using an older version of Next Safe Action and 15.1 or above with Next.js. So let's go ahead and set this up. We'll go 55555. There we go. Put in my email address. This should cause a duplicate entry error because it's supposed to be unique. Also duplicate the phone number that's supposed to be unique. But when I do this, I'm going to get probably an error we don't expect. Next Safe Action has been catching all those errors, but now Next.js has issued this error. And if we look at it, it looks something like this, an unhandled runtime error. So once again, this is because we're using Next Safe Action 7.9.9, which is an older version now, and we're using Next.js 15.1 or above. So we need to update our dependencies, and then we'll see the actual error that we would expect to get. So let's go ahead and reload this page. There we go. And we've got Jane's information back here now because I went back in the history. Go forward to the new customer form again. But let's go back to VS Code, update the dependencies, then we'll see what the actual error is that we should be catching, and we'll refactor code as well. Okay, I'm back in VS Code now, and you can see we've got Next Safe Action 7.9.9 listed in our package JSON. We also have Next 15.1. So we need to update these. Let's go ahead and open the terminal window. Control C to stop the server. I'll type clear just to clear all of that out as well. I'm going to type npm I next-safe-action. At latest, we also need the --legacy-peer-deps. As I've said many times, you're watching this in the future, you may not need that flag at all. Right now, it's just because Next.js 15, React 19 are very new and the dependencies are catching up. Okay, we'll press enter. We should get a newer version now installed. Let's go ahead and look at our package JSON, and we've got Next Safe Action 7.10.2, so a newer version. And we could actually upgrade Next, so let's go ahead and do that as well. So this would be npm I next at latest --legacy-peer-deps once again, just so it agrees with the other dependencies that we've got in there. And when this finishes, I think we'll be at Next.js 15.1.1 maybe. I think that was what I saw the latest was, but it can change from an hour to hour sometimes. So let's take a look. Yes, right now, Next.js 15.1.1, Next Safe Action 7.10.2. These work well together. So we'll go ahead and rerun the code now. Start the server back up with npm run dev. And when this gets started back up, we'll meet back in the browser at the application. Okay, we've restarted the server. We're back in the browser. I'm going to once again enter my new customer information and create a new error. And this should be the error we expect instead of something unexpected like we had when those dependencies weren't working together. So I'll say here, Kansas 555s, and then my email address that will cause that duplicate entry where it should be unique. Same with the phone number. Okay, now this will help us avoid a client-side React hook form validation error, so I can go ahead and submit, see what error we get. Currently, we're catching this with our safe action, and that is, of course, in the lib directory. We have that safe-action file, and it says database error. Your data did not save. Support will be notified. And normally that would be okay because we don't want to mystify users with some crazy error that we maybe get from the database that only us devs would understand. But in this case, specifically this case, the error is because we just aren't allowing duplicate entries of email or phone numbers, and it's probably catching the email first. But that's really a validation error. That's some information we should probably send back to the user instead of catching that and sending it to Sentry. We should just let the user know and allow them to fix that. Well, we can do that. So let's go back to VS Code and provide that feedback for the user if we get that unique key duplicate type of error for the email or the phone number. Okay, back in VS Code, you can see I'm in the lib directory, and then I'm in the safe-action.ts file. That's what I have open here. Let's import a type at the top of the file. I want to import type, and this is going to be neondb error, and it comes from @neondatabase/serverless. So we're going to use that type as we identify the error. So here we have our defined metadata schema inside the create safe action client, and that's where we want to still have that. And then when we get into the handle server error, we want to go ahead and identify that error first before we have Sentry.captureException. So previously we were identifying it kind of after the Sentry.captureException. Let's go ahead and do that before. So I'm going to copy this if statement because we're going to identify the neondb error just like we are here with the constructor name to start out with. But we want to leave this one where it is as well. Let me go ahead and hide the file tree also. And now I'll put this up here above the Sentry.captureException, but below where we destructure the utils that are passed into handle server error. And let's just change what we're doing here. Besides the constructor name being the neondb error, we're not necessarily going to return. So we want an if statement in here if we're looking for a specific error. But to get the type of error that we are looking for, we have to destructure the neondb error. So here we know it's a neondb error. So let's go ahead and destructure that with const, and we can get code. We can also get detail. Both of those would be useful. There are other things you can get as well from that object. So if you want to log that, for example, when it comes in, then you could see what that is. Actually log the error itself because it is a neondb error. So we're going to say equals E, that's the error where we're destructuring the code and the detail from, and you could get other things from it. Here I'm going to say as neondb error. Okay, so now we know what type of error it is. We actually know that from here, but now we're just using the type. We've got the code and the detail. Now after that, let's put in our if statement. We can say if code equals, now this needs to be a string, but 23505. That's the specific error for that duplicate unique entry. Or unique entry is required, essentially, is what the error is, and we've tried to supply data that was already in the database. So now I want to have a return statement. So I'm going to copy this, or I'll just delete this, and I can type the new return statement. Here we're going to have return, and now I want to say unique entry required, and now I'm going to put the detail right in this message that goes back to the user, and that will say what field it is, and of course that it says it should be unique, and it's not. So we'll look at that error when we get that back, but this is what we're going to send back. But of course, if it's not code 23505, then this is not going to return. We're going to make it on down to the Sentry.captureException area, and we're going to go ahead and capture that exception. And we could also make it on down to this part where it is a database error. So if we have an error from the database, once again, that isn't this specific code, it's not this unique entry required error that we're returning to the user here, then they'll still see the message we were sending for the other database errors. And of course, we'll get the exact error from this detail here sent back to us with Sentry. So this should be all we need to handle that duplicate unique entry and give the proper feedback to the user. Let's try it back out in the browser. Okay, I'm back in the browser, and I've still got my information here entered into the new customer form. And of course, we've got the previous database error up here, but I should be able to just resubmit this and now get our new error message. So let's try that out. We're saving. We've got an error, save failed, and now up above, instead of that message that didn't give the user good feedback, this one says unique entry required, key email equals dave@davegray.codes already exists. Well, that's great. That's the message detail that we sent back inside of that template literal. And this is exactly what the user needs to see to know, hey, this is a duplicate email. So we need to enter in some other email. So if I just said dave@dave.com, well, that's not an email address I have. Somebody probably does. But now we'll probably catch the error for the duplicate phone entry because it should also be unique. So let me try to save it one more time. Save error failed. Unique entry required. Now key phone, and gives the phone number, already exists. So yes, we're catching that for both of those fields, and it works as expected. And now we have finished our refactoring. We've also added data polling to bring in live updates to our tickets table. It's time to just explore the app a little bit and use it as if we were one of the repair shop techs and check to see if everything is the way we want it. I think when we click on one of the tickets, when we get these search results back, we can edit one of the tickets. Of course, you've just started the dev server. It renders on demand, so it takes just a little bit to navigate to the edit ticket page at first. But after that, here we've got the edit ticket page. Everything looks good. I am an admin user, or I'm logged in as an admin user right now, so I can pick which tech is assigned the ticket. And of course, you should check with both types of users to make sure the permissions are set up the way you expect. Now, when we go back to the tickets table, we can filter and do all of the things, of course, that we've already done with the tickets table. So we know that works. Let's now go to the search customers page. And once we're on the search customers page, let's just look at all of the customers. And here, if we click on a customer, we should be able to go edit one of the customers. Yes, and here's the edit customer page. And we go back to the table. Now that we've kind of explored the app, do you see anything that is missing in the application? There is something missing. And of course, if we go up here and click on users, we can search customers or create a new customer. We click on tickets, we're taken right back to the tickets table where we can search for existing tickets. But how do we create a new ticket? We have left that part out. And remember, you need to start with a customer. The customer must exist first before you can create the new ticket. So let's go ahead and add a link to this table. So we're not just clicking on the customer to edit the customer. We have two options here. We want to be able to either create a new ticket for the customer or edit the customer. Let's go back to VS Code and set this last feature up. And back in VS Code, we are in the customer table file. So that's inside of the customer segment, and then look for the customer table.tsx file. Okay, inside of this file, we can make all of the changes that we need to make so we can link to both the customer edit form and, of course, the new ticket form that passes in a customer ID. We already have these forms in place, so it's just creating the links from the table. So we're going to start by adding one extra import to our TanStack React table imports, and that's going to be the cell context. After that, let's scroll down just a little bit, and underneath the table imports that we're getting from shadcn, we're already using the drop-down menu as we click on the user icon in the header, and then of course we can search customers or go to a new customer. We're going to once again use the drop-down menu inside of our table now for the customers table. So we'll say import. Here we need drop-down menu. Then we're going to need drop-down menu content, and then drop-down menu item, drop-down menu label, drop-down menu separator, and finally, drop-down menu trigger. And these are all going to come from, which we'd already added to our project for the header, they're going to come from @components/UI/drop-down menu. Okay, after that, we need a couple of Lucid React icons. So we're going to import more horizontal. We're also going to import table of contents. Both of these are icons from Lucid React. I almost forgot, we also need to import button from shadcn that we're using. So here is button, and that's going to come from @/components/UI/button. And then we need to import link from Next Navigation. So it's from Next Link actually, so it doesn't go on the same line as useRouter, but we want to import link from Next/link. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and start adding to our function below. So here we are in the customer table function. Okay, so at this point, I want to hide the file tree so I can have just a little more room. Let's go underneath our column helper. And what we're going to do is manually create one column. Then we're going to add it to the first element of our, as the first element of our columns array. And the rest of the different columns will still be created here by mapping, but the first one will be manually created by us. So let's go ahead and start that creation here. I'm going to call it an action column because we can take different actions, of course, linked to two different places with it. So it'll be const actions cell. I'm going to set this equal to a function, and we destructure the row that comes into this function. And now this is where we use the cell context that we just imported for TypeScript, pass in the select customer schema type, and then unknown is the second param there that we pass in. And after that, this is an arrow function. And inside of this function, we'll just start our return right away. And this is where we use the drop-down menu. So we're going to be able to click on a little icon in the cell, and it's going to display the menu for each row that we want to click on like that. So inside of this, we'll start with our drop-down menu. And inside of the drop-down menu, we have the drop-down menu trigger, and we want to put as child here for it. Then inside of the drop-down menu trigger, we'll have the button. Let's go ahead and put this on a new line. Set the variant equal to ghost. We'll have a class name line, and we'll set that equal to a height -8, width -8, padding -0. Okay, now we can close out our button, and inside the button, let's put a span first. Class name equals sr-only, so this is just good practice, screen reader only. It says open menu, and that's because we're going to actually have a little icon inside of here that we click on instead of words. And then here's the icon, more horizontal, and class name here, set this equal to height -4, width -4. And we can close out the icon. So that is our trigger to launch the menu. Okay, after the drop-down trigger, let's go ahead and put drop-down menu content. We'll say align equals end. Now inside the drop-down menu content, we can start to put in the items, and of course we need a label to start it off with. So drop-down menu label. This is going to be actions. Now after the label, let's put in the drop-down menu separator that we had imported. Now we'll put in the individual items. So drop-down menu item. And inside here, we'll put our link. So the first link, href equals, and of course, let's use curly braces here, template literal, and we'll go to /tickets/form, and then we'll put the customer ID param, so that equals, and now we get the customer ID from row.original.id. Remember, we're passing the row into the function up here, so now we can get that value. Now after we have that, let's put these on separate lines also. Then we'll put a class name here, and let's set this class name equal to width-full. I'm not so sure we need that, but we can go ahead and use it, and then we can put prefetch. And we'll set this equal to false. I suppose width full is good if we want the link to expand all the way across the cell, for example. So we'll go ahead and leave it there for now. And of course, you can experiment and remove that or apply your own classes as you want to. At some point, I did that in my past, and I'm trying to remember exactly why. So it's worth experimenting with and see how it works out for you. Okay, then we just put in the link, new ticket. So that way, I guess we don't have to just probably click on the words. We could click anywhere in that line, in that cell, or in that menu that pops up. But it's not going to be that big anyway. We'll probably click on the words. Okay, so that's the first menu item. And as you might guess, we're going to follow a pattern here. So I'm going to just highlight that menu item, Shift, Alt, and the down arrow. And now we can just change this. So this second link is going to go to customers/form, pass in the customer ID. It'll have the same class names, prefetch false. And here we'll put edit customer. So we can choose to create a new ticket for the customer or edit the customer, and this will apply. It adds a new cell or a new column to the entire table, a new cell to each customer's row. Okay, after that, we still need to change the current link we have, because right now if we click on the row, it always goes to edit customer, and this won't override that. We need to actually remove it. So when we scroll down into the table, let's find where that is. And here it is. It's the on click that we have in the table row. So we want to remove that because we don't want to have a row click take us to the customer edit. We also want to be able to create a new ticket. Okay, we're not quite finished yet though. We have created our new cell manually up here. And one other note here, when we create a cell manually, we're going to get a lint error when we build our project unless we add a display name. So then after you create it, you want to go actions cell.display name and just set it equal to actions cell or whatever you've named your component. Again, this will just prevent an ESLint error when it will say that it actually needs a display name. Okay, after that, we need to alter the columns here so it will go ahead and show up on the page. Right now, we haven't included it in the table columns yet. So what we want to do is make this an array. So start off with our bracket here for the beginning of the array and a bracket here for the end of the array. Bring this down to a new line and use the spread operator. So you've got spreading in all the values that are created as we map over. And then we need to put in our new element right here, the first element in the array. So what we want to do here, we've created it above, so you can see it is the actions cell. We want to use the column helper here just for a single column. Say column helper dot display. Now parentheses, curly braces. Inside of this, we'll say ID is actions. And let's put in the header. Here, let's go ahead and use the header function. This is where we'll use our table of contents icon. And after that, for the cell, here we go, we'll just pass in the actions cell that we just created. Then after this, we'll put a comma because it's the first element in the array. And then our map, and of course, we'll spread in the result of that, but our map will create the other elements of this columns array. So now we've added in our manual column before the others that are created by mapping over. So let's save that. And now let's go back to the browser and take a look. I'm back in the browser, and now you can see our new column over here on the left. And let's check out the dots that we have here, and that launches our drop menu so we can create a new ticket for Bob. Of course, it might take just a second to render that here in dev mode, but here we are in the new ticket form for Bob Brown, so it pulled in the correct customer info. And if we come back here, then we could also choose Edit Customer, and now we're on the Edit Customer page for Bob. So let's try it out let's try my name here, Dave Gray, new ticket, and here it is, customer info. It's got the information there. If we come back, go Edit Customer, and yep, now we're on the Edit Customer page for my customer. So that all works as expected. One thing I would like to do, just a little bit of design here, is this is kind of wide, a wide column for just having our three dots here, the ellipses, launch the menu, and the little icon here. So let's narrow this down so it's doesn't have as much width, and maybe we'll want to center this little icon at the top as well that indicates it's a menu. So let's make that last change back in VS Code. I'm back in VS Code on the customer table component and file. Let's scroll down to the return here and go to the table head area right here. So we have a class name with background secondary applied, but let's go ahead and start this with curly brackets instead and make it a template literal. Now we can just add some more to this template literal. So we'll start off with background secondary, and I may need to wrap this down to the next line if it doesn't start. Now we're going to insert some information, and it's going to be header.id, but we're not inserting the header ID. We're actually going to create a ternary statement. So we're going to check to see if the header ID equals actions for our actions column. So we're only applying this class change now if it is the actions column. And if it is, we're going to set the width-12 class. And if not, we'll just have an empty string. And after that, we end our template literal and close out the table head. So that sets the width of the column the way we want it. And by setting this in the head, it will apply to all the cells underneath as well. However, you could still set this in the table cell below the table cell component. You could look for the same thing and set the width there. And then for this div, this has the actual icon in it here in the table head. So we need to go ahead and apply a similar class here. So let's go class name equals, we'll use curly brackets once again. Then I'm going to just start off by looking for the header.id. Of course, if it equals actions, then I'm going to apply flex and then justify-center and items-center. Otherwise, once again, an empty string. So those three classes combined should center that icon nicely. Okay, so let's go back now to the browser and take a look. But before we do, I typed action here, not actions. Let's go ahead and add the S there so it actually goes ahead and applies those classes as expected. Back in the browser now, you can see the width of our column is much less. It looks a lot better this way to me. So we just have this little menu column over here, and this icon is centered at the top. And of course, menus still works as expected. Okay, we are now moving into marathon video tutorial space here because this has gone on so long, but we have two more bugs that have popped up as I have been working on this video that I want to squash before I end the video. So let me show you the first one quickly. Once again, if we go to Jane's edit customer page, now we fixed the issue to where if we now click up here and go to new customer, it is now ready for new customer information. But if I hit the back button in the browser, now I'm on the edit customer page. It even knows edit customer number 2, but it doesn't show Jane's information. So what's happening here? Well, the Next.js router on the client side is not going back and essentially refreshing that data from the server component when we use the back button here. So we really need to make this component remount so we get the correct data when we go back. So let's go into VS Code and fix this issue. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. I'm going to hide the file tree with Control B. I'm going to scroll down where we put in that use effect to fix the previous issue where we wanted the new customer form to be blank when we navigated to it from the edit customer form. And we put this use effect in there for that. Now, one thing I didn't do, which I really want to do, use effect, can always have issues with putting dependencies in the dependency array. You put in the wrong ones and it will just run every time, such as anything really that is an object will have a new reference like default values or empty values. So I don't have that in the dependency array. I don't have form in there either because it's kind of an object too, right? We can call methods from it. It's just more complex data. Here, we're getting specific data from search params. We're getting the customer ID. So that's good to look at, and we need that to trigger it. We could put has customer ID in here too, but it's not really part of the logic of triggering it. So what I'm going to do is just put in the one or leave the one in that was required, but I'm also going to put in the comma just so we don't get an ESLint error here. So ESLint disable dash line space and then react dash hooks slash exhaustive dash depths. Let me press Alt Z to wrap that down. So I just want to leave that in there so we don't get an ESLint error when we go to build our project in the next lesson. Okay, now I want to quickly show the file tree. There's one other fix I want to put in here before we move to the server component and really fix that remounting. And that is the input here we have in our customer search. We probably should have put in the auto focus prop, so it just gets focused when we load that as well. So let's add autofocus to that input in customer search. Now let's go back into form to the page.tsx and fix the actual issue that I had identified there. First, Control B to hide the file tree. So what is happening when we use the back button, it's not remounting the customer form and therefore not sending in the data that we expect to reload into the form and give us that customer information for Jane when we use that back button. So it's kind of a tricky thing. What we can do is put in the key prop. Now a React component will always remount if you change the value passed in as the key prop. So I'm going to pass in the customer ID here when we're editing a customer. Alt Z to wrap that down. So pass in the key. So here I also want to pass in a key, and this will just always be new for a new customer. Now this will force this component to remount, and now when we use the back button we should see Jane's information again. So we should be able to go from Jane on the edit customer screen to a new customer form that is blank, then hit the back button in the browser and once again see Jane's data in the edit customer form as expected. Let's check it out. Okay, I'm back in the browser. I'm just going to start fresh by going to search customers here. Let's go ahead and search for all the customers. Now we've got them. I will go to Jane's edit customer window. Now we see Jane's information here in the edit customer screen. Let's go to a new customer form. Okay, now let's hit the back button and we've got Jane's information once again. So that's what we wanted to see happen by making that change. Now let's look at the last bug that I want to squash, and we'll go back to the tickets page for that. So it'll take it just a moment here to render the ticket table. Now that we have it, we had fixed the pagination along with our data polling combination. So now, of course, when we go to page 2, and then of course it would refresh the data at the regular interval. I don't have it at that short interval right now to show that. However, we're on page 2, and so what if I now just look for posts by Charlie, or filter for posts by Charlie here, or tickets from Charlie, when I'm on page 2. So this is what we identified earlier in the video. Really, there's 3 results, but we're going to see those on the first page, and our page state here in the URL is keeping us on page 2. So it says page 2 of 1, and we're not seeing the results even though there are 3 total results. So this is no good. We need to fix this, and we can easily do that back in our ticket table component. I'm back in VS Code. Let's go ahead and show the file tree once again with Control B. And now I will scroll down to the tickets segment here, and let's look at ticket table. And actually, let's look at ticket search because I just added that autofocus to the other input. Let's put autofocus in this one as well. Okay, after adding autofocus there, let's go to ticket table. And now let's scroll down to just before the return. So that's a little ways down in this one. Here we are, just before the return. Let's add a little space. Control B to hide the file tree, and we're going to put in a use effect that's going to have to check a couple of things, and that will let us keep our filtered state in sync with our pagination state that's all now being managed in the URL. So here we go with use effect. Looks like we may need to import use effect too. So we'll start that. Now I can mouse over this and we should see a quick fix, and I can say update import from React. There we go. And now it should be imported back at the top of the file. Now let's get the current page index. Set this equal to table.getState, and then we can get the pagination and then dot page index. So the get state method on table is how you can access a lot of the different state directly. After that, const page count, set this equal to table dot get page count. Lots of different methods available on table from React Table. Now let's say if page count is less than or equal to current page index and current page index is greater than 0, then we'll do something here. Let's define params, set this equal to new URL search params. So now this is going to look familiar, kind of like what we did in the previous and next buttons. So we're going to have search params dot toString. And after that, we'll say params dot set, and we're going to set the page param. Need that as a string also to 1. Then we'll have router dot replace once again. And now here we'll have a template literal question mark. We'll insert params and call toString method. And then after that, we still need a comma. And here we're going to put scroll false once again. So these lines here inside this if statement look much like what you had previously put inside of the previous and next buttons for pagination. But here we're just checking to see if the page count is less than or equal to the current page index and the current page index is greater than 0. So this is going to help us adjust that table state when we filter. Say we're on page 2 and we filter for Charlie and there's only 3 results. It should put us back on page 1 and allow us to see those 3 results like we expect to. Okay, in the dependency array, we're going to put in table.getState, then column filters, because we only want this to change when the column filters change. So that should be a stable enough reference to only run this when we actually change the column filters. And that's what we want. And of course, there's more that you could put in here in the dependency array. Again, you could put in the table.getState pagination page index. You could put in the get page count. These are both numbers. However, what would cause a re-render every time would be, say, the search params or router. Now, ESLint would want all of those to possibly be in there. So I'm going to once again put in ESLint dash disable dash line, then react dash hooks slash exhaustive dash depths. Alt Z to wrap that down. But just providing that so we don't get an ESLint error. But that should take care of the issue we had. Now let's take a look back in the browser. Okay, back in the browser, I'm on page 2. We've got 16 total results. Let's filter this for Charlie. And you saw a quick little flash there, but now we're on page 1 of 1 with 3 total results. If I reset the filters, we're on page 1 of 2 with 16 total results. So let's do that one more time. Go page 2, I'm going to select Jane, and now we have page 1 of 1, 4 total results. We were on page 2. So now when we filter and there are less than 10 results, it is switching the page back to page 1 and showing us those results. And that's what we wanted. Okay, and the absolute final pagination fix for today is when we filter for something that doesn't exist at all. And when we do that, notice we get page 1 of 0. I don't like that. I'd rather it say page 1 of 1. Even though there's 0 results, we have 1 page, right? So I want it to say page 1 of 1. So let's go ahead, go back to VS Code, make the very quick change for this very last I promise change here before we close out today's tutorial. And all we have to do is scroll down to where we're saying page 1 of 1, and we're going to change this right here where we show the table page count. All we need to do is wrap this in math.max, pass in 1 here, and then a comma, then have our table page count, and of course put the closing parentheses here. Now it's going to show 1 instead of 0. So let's save. We'll go back to the browser and check that out quickly. So now when I search for ZZZ as the first name, it is page 1 of 1 with 0 total results. Now that's what I expected and wanted to see. So we've completed a lot of refactoring today. We've added some new features. Play around with the application, see if there's anything you want to change, and of course make sure to leave those in the comments as well for others to consider. And remember, this is a non-exhaustive list. I haven't completed everything I would possibly do with this application yet, but it's a really good foundation, I think. And I'm sure I'm going to receive more recommendations and requests in the comments as well, and that's great. I do plan to add more to this project. I'm going to create some additional premium videos after this series has completed for my channel. And I want to add extras like modals with intercepted routes, maybe an admin dashboard, definitely sending email notifications to customers to let them know their repair ticket is finished, maybe ticket progress tracking as well, and even billing with a Stripe integration. So those are all like little separate modules I plan to create at some point after this series. And I'll be announcing all of these additions as they're available, and you can always check my site at courses.davegray.codes for the latest too. And of course, sign up for my newsletter there. That will help get the announcements out to you. And for now, we've only got one more video to go, and that's building and deploying our Next.js Full Stack project. A quick shout out to my patrons. Holy Coder is a progress provider. Sean Lynch and Gregory Perry are senior patrons, and all of my junior patrons, Isaac, Will, Ernie, Stacy, Abe, Javier, Michael, Malik. Thank you all so very much. You're helping me reach my goals. And if you'd like to learn more about my Patreon, check it out at patreon.com/davegray. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.